The millionaire CEO had never missed a deal, until a little girl ran into the street after her teddy bear, and he slammed the brakes just in time, only to come face to face with the woman he once walked away from, and the daughter he never knew he had. Daniel Harper never expected anything to interrupt his schedule. The morning had begun just like any other, his suit perfectly pressed, his driver out sick so he took the wheel himself, and his mind already 10 steps ahead, rehearsing the pitch that would finalize a deal worth tens of millions. He was on track, as always. His navigation had him cutting through a quiet residential street to avoid traffic lights, the sun glinting off the polished hood of his black sedan. He wasn't speeding recklessly, just efficiently, with a confidence born from a life of control and precision. But everything unraveled in less than a second. A flash of white darted into the road. He slammed the brakes instinctively, tires screeching against pavement as the car jolted to a halt. The silence that followed was deafening. He sat frozen, his heart hammering in his chest, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. Through the windshield, just inches from the front bumper, stood a little girl. She was no older than 5, with wild, golden blonde curls, clutching a plush teddy bear in her arms. Her blue eyes were wide, not quite crying, not quite comprehending. For a terrifying moment, she looked straight at him, and time seemed to collapse around that single gaze. Daniel threw the door open and stepped out, his voice caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. "Are you okay?" he managed, lowering himself to one knee as he approached her. She didn't answer. She just nodded slowly, still hugging the bear tightly to her chest. That's when he heard the voice calling out. A woman, panicked but controlled, rushing toward them from the sidewalk outside a small cafe. "Emma," she shouted, breathless, and scooped the girl into her arms. Daniel straightened, stepping back. He looked at the woman and felt the ground shift beneath him. The voice was familiar. The eyes were familiar. The shape of her face, the way she held herself, even the quick scan she gave Emma to check for injuries, it all came back to him in an instant. Lily. Her hair was longer now, tied back hastily, and her face bore the wear of sleepless nights and years past, but there was no mistaking her. It was the woman he had once loved, the woman he had left behind when he chose to chase success over stability, ambition over intimacy. She looked up, her expression going from relieved to stunned in the span of a breath. Their eyes locked, and the memory of their last conversation hit like a wave. Neither spoke right away. Emma, sensing something unspoken, leaned her head against Lily's shoulder. Daniel stepped forward slightly, his voice low. "Is she?" He didn't finish the question. He couldn't. But Lily's answer didn't come with hesitation. "Yes," she said, not bitterly, just simply. "She's yours." The air between them changed. The street disappeared. The sound of passing cars and birds and distant music meant nothing. Daniel looked at the little girl again. The curls. The blue eyes. And suddenly, it all made sense in the most impossible, undeniable way. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the street, the sound of his heartbeat louder than the hum of passing traffic or the soft murmurs of morning around them. Lily's words echoed in his mind with staggering force, "She's yours." He didn't even notice how tightly he was gripping his car keys until they bit into his palm. Across from him, Lily adjusted her hold on Emma, who still clutched the stuffed bear as if the morning's chaos hadn't quite registered. The child glanced between them, confused but quiet, and Daniel suddenly became aware of how absurd and exposed the moment was, taking place in the open air with the past colliding into his present like a crash he hadn't seen coming. "I think we should go somewhere to talk," Lily said after a moment, her voice steady but guarded. Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak just yet. She gestured toward the cafe she had come from, the one with its name stenciled across the window in faded gold. It looked like the kind of place that hadn't changed in a decade, and as they stepped inside, Daniel couldn't help but think how far away he was from boardrooms and conference calls. They slid into a booth by the window, the waitress recognizing Lily and bringing her a mug of coffee without asking. Daniel declined anything. His hands were still trembling slightly, and he didn't want to show it. Lily sat across from him, Emma nestled beside her with a coloring book and a small box of crayons the waitress had brought over. The girl had settled quickly, comforted by proximity and routine, while the two adults faced something far less manageable. Daniel watched Lily quietly for a moment, noting the changes, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, the calm weariness of someone who had been through more than she ever should have alone. She didn't rush to fill the silence, letting him sit with the weight of what she had said. "You didn't tell me," he finally said, not accusing, just stating. "You didn't even try." "I wrote you a letter," she replied. "More than one, actually. But I never sent them. Every time I tried, I told myself you'd moved on. That you wouldn't want this. That it would only complicate your life. So I stopped trying." Daniel felt that truth settle in his chest like a stone. Part of him wanted to argue, to say he had a right to know, but a louder part knew she had made an impossible decision in the absence of support. He had walked away first. He hadn't called. He hadn't looked back. "I thought about you," he said, his voice lower now, more vulnerable. "So many times. I thought you'd be better off without me." Lily gave a small, tired smile. "I was. For a while. Then I wasn't. But I managed. Emma has everything she needs. She's loved, she's safe, and she's never once asked why she doesn't have a dad, because I never let her feel like she was missing anything." Daniel looked at the girl, now completely immersed in her coloring, her tongue poking slightly out in concentration. He tried to imagine her first words, her first steps, every little moment he had missed while he was busy flying between cities and sealing contracts. "She's perfect," he said, almost to himself. "She's strong," Lily agreed. "And smart. And stubborn, which is definitely from me. But the rest? The eyes, the way she notices everything, those are all you." He turned back to Lily, overwhelmed. "What happens now?" "I don't know," she said, honest and unapologetic. "I didn't plan for this. I didn't think we'd ever see each other again. But if you want to know her, really know her, it has to be on her terms. And mine. No disappearing. No half measures. She doesn't need someone who shows up once and then vanishes when it's inconvenient." "I won't vanish," Daniel said quickly, and for the first time in years, he meant it with complete clarity. "I'm not going anywhere." Lily studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face for any sign of old intentions or new doubts. Whatever she saw must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay. Then we'll start with small steps." She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and scribbled an address. "We're at the park most afternoons after school. If you show up for real." Daniel took the paper, folding it carefully and slipping it into his jacket like something sacred. Outside, the day had brightened, but inside the cafe, the world had already shifted. He looked at Emma one more time before standing. She didn't look up, but he whispered, "I'll see you soon," and meant it. As he stepped out the door, the sharp scent of coffee and something sweeter followed him, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel Harper didn't feel like he was heading to a meeting. He felt like he was walking toward something that might finally matter. The next afternoon, Daniel stood at the edge of the park, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his coat, watching the playground from behind a row of tall hedges. The note Lily had given him with the park's address was folded twice in his wallet, its corners already soft from how often he'd opened it that day. He had cleared his entire afternoon schedule, a fact that would have shocked his assistants if he'd told them why. But he didn't. He wasn't ready to explain this to anyone. He was still trying to understand it himself. From where he stood, he could see children running across the grass, chasing each other, parents sitting on benches with coffee cups and tired eyes. There was laughter, squeals, the sharp clang of the swing chains, the clatter of sneakers on pavement. And there, near a blue and green jungle gym, was Emma. She was crouched in the sandbox with two other children, using a plastic shovel to build what looked like a castle. She wore a purple jacket and a bright yellow bow in her hair. Daniel didn't move right away. He just watched. She looked so small from this distance, but every movement, her determined expression, the way she gently brushed sand off a friend's shoulder, was filled with an energy that made his chest ache. He'd missed 5 years. That reality sat heavy on his shoulders. Every first word, every birthday candle, every tear over a scraped knee. He'd missed it all. And yet, here she was. Real. Alive. Within reach. He spotted Lily nearby, sitting on a bench with a book open in her lap, though her eyes were more on Emma than the page. She looked up after a few moments and found him immediately, like she'd known exactly when he'd arrive. She gave a short nod. Not a wave. Not a smile. Just a nod of acknowledgement. That was enough. It was permission. Daniel made his way across the grass slowly, his shoes quiet against the soft earth. He wasn't sure what to say when he reached her, so he didn't start with words. He sat down at the far end of the bench and waited. Lily closed her book but didn't look at him right away. "She's been here all afternoon," Lily said after a moment, her voice calm. "She gets restless in the house after school. The park helps." Daniel nodded. "She seems happy." "She is. Most of the time." They sat in silence again. It wasn't hostile. Just cautious. Careful. He finally spoke. "I didn't know what to bring, or if I even should. I thought maybe showing up would be enough for the first time." Lily nodded slightly. "It's a start." They watched Emma together for a few more minutes. Then Lily added, "You can go say hi, if you want." Daniel looked at her in surprise, unsure if she meant it. But she just gestured toward the sandbox. "She doesn't know you yet. But she's curious. She asked who you were yesterday, after we left the cafe." "What did you tell her?" "I said you were someone who wanted to get to know her. And that if she wanted, she could decide when and how." Daniel swallowed, unsure how to process the mixture of hope and fear rising inside him. He stood and walked slowly to the sandbox, kneeling a few feet away so he wouldn't seem too close, too sudden. Emma looked up from her sandcastle and stared at him. Her bright blue eyes were even clearer up close. "Hi," he said softly. "I'm Daniel." She blinked at him, then tilted her head. "That's a grown-up name." He smiled. "It is. I'm a grown-up." She thought about this. "Do you like sand?" "I do. Especially castles." She looked down at her structure and nudged a crumbling tower with her shovel. "This one's not very good." "I think it's pretty great," he said. "Better than any castle I ever built." She studied him for a moment longer, then scooted slightly to the side. "You can help if you want. But don't mess up the bridge." "I won't," he promised. He picked up a small plastic bucket and began helping her fill it with damp sand. They worked quietly, side by side. She didn't ask who he was or why he was there. She just let him in, tentatively, like someone opening a door just enough to peek through. That was enough for now. When Lily called her a little while later, Emma looked up and waved at Daniel. "Bye," she said simply, before running off. Daniel stayed kneeling in the sand long after she left, watching her go, feeling the weight of the world shift just a little more into place. He hadn't been ready yesterday. He wasn't sure if he was ready now. But he was here. And somehow, that was already changing everything. Over the next week, Daniel returned to the park every afternoon, each time arriving a few minutes earlier than the day before, just in case. The first few visits were quiet. He didn't bring gifts or try to force conversation. He simply showed up, sat at the edge of the sandbox, and waited until Emma acknowledged him. At first, she mostly watched him from the corner of her eye, occasionally offering a comment about her sandcastle or asking if he'd seen a butterfly she spotted nearby. But with each day, something shifted. She began to save a place for him next to her, handing him a bucket before he even sat down. She told him about her school lunch, her favorite stuffed animals, and how she liked the moon more than the sun because it didn't make her squint. Daniel listened, nodded, and added just enough of himself to show her he cared without ever taking up too much space. Lily continued to observe from a distance, always close enough to step in, but never interrupting unless Emma called for her. Daniel noticed how she let Emma lead the pace of their interactions. He understood now, this wasn't just about him making up for lost time, it was about Emma feeling safe, feeling seen. Every time she reached for his hand or laughed at something he said, it felt like a small miracle. He wasn't earning trust with declarations or apologies. He was earning it with consistency. One afternoon, after a particularly long castle-building session, Emma turned to him and said, "You can come to my school play if you want. But only if you don't wear your serious face." Daniel blinked, surprised, and laughed. "I'll try to leave it at home," he promised. She grinned, pleased with herself, and began drawing a ticket on a scrap of paper she pulled from her coat pocket. He watched her with a quiet awe, stunned by how much space someone so small could take up in a heart he hadn't realized was empty. After she ran off to the swings, Daniel walked over to Lily's bench. She looked up from her book but didn't close it, just slipped a ribbon between the pages. He sat beside her, unsure how to start. She beat him to it. "She talks about you at home now," Lily said, not smiling, but not distant either. "She asks if you're coming back each day." "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel said quietly. "Even if she stops asking." Lily studied him, her eyes soft but wary. "You say that now. But I've raised her to survive disappointment. I need to know that you're not a new chapter that closes just as fast as it opened." "I know what I was," he said. "I know I left. I made every selfish choice I could when I walked away. But something's different now. She's changed me, Lily. Even in just a few days." "She doesn't know the full story," Lily replied. "But one day she will. And I won't lie to her to make it easier for you." Daniel nodded. "I don't want her to think I was perfect. I just want her to know I'm here now, and that I won't run." They sat together for a while, saying nothing. The breeze picked up. Leaves blew across the path, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Emma ran back to show them a leaf she'd found shaped like a star. Daniel knelt to look at it and told her it was the most magical leaf he'd ever seen. She handed it to him, told him to keep it, and ran off again. As he held the small, brittle leaf in his palm, Daniel realized that this moment, this ordinary, gentle moment, was more important than any boardroom, any contract, any title. He wasn't trying to rebuild what was lost. He was learning to build something entirely new. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of where it might lead. By the end of the second week, the rhythm between Daniel, Emma, and Lily had settled into something that almost resembled normalcy. It was fragile, like glass still cooling, but it was real. Daniel no longer waited on the edge of the park. He arrived and walked directly to the sandbox or the swings, wherever Emma happened to be. She greeted him without hesitation now, sometimes waving wildly, sometimes running straight into his arms with stories spilling out of her before he had a chance to say hello. It was in those unguarded moments that he saw the truth of her trust beginning to take shape, the way her eyes lit up when she spotted him, the way she reached for his hand naturally, not as a test but out of instinct. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about belonging. One afternoon, Emma brought him a picture she had drawn, 3 stick figures standing under a big yellow sun, one taller than the others, and all 3 holding hands. Daniel felt something unsteady rise in his throat when she pointed to each one and named them. "That's me. That's Mommy. And that's you. You have the tie." He looked down at the drawing, then up at her, and all he could say was thank you. She beamed and said he could keep it. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket like it was a contract more binding than any he'd ever signed. Later that evening, Lily invited Daniel to walk them home. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't framed as a reward. It was simple, like the trust that had begun to grow between them, quiet, deliberate, necessary. They strolled along the sidewalk, Emma skipping ahead of them, humming a song she made up as she went. Daniel and Lily kept pace behind her, not speaking at first, just listening to the rhythm of the moment. It was almost sunset. The sky was streaked with gold and lavender, and the world felt unusually calm, like it was holding its breath for them. Lily broke the silence. You know she's going to ask questions soon. About us. About why you weren't around before. Daniel nodded, his eyes on Emma's bouncing silhouette up ahead. I've thought about it every day. I don't have perfect answers. But I'll never lie to her. Lily glanced at him. She doesn't need perfect. She needs honest. Age-appropriate, but honest. He looked at her then, truly looked. I'll tell her I made mistakes. I chose my career. I let fear and pride lead me away. But I'll also tell her that the moment I saw her, everything changed. They walked in silence for a moment longer, until Lily said, I think she already knows. At her apartment, Emma insisted on showing him her bookshelf, her favorite blanket, and the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. Daniel followed her, letting her explain every detail with the authority of a child who believed her world was important and worthy of attention. And to him, it was. More than any office or city skyline ever had been. Lily watched them from the doorway. Her arms were crossed, but there was no tension in her body anymore. Just observation. Maybe even something close to peace. Before he left, Emma hugged him and whispered, you should come for pancakes one day. He crouched to her level and promised he would. She looked at her mother for confirmation. Lily didn't say yes or no. She just nodded, slowly, as if weighing something deeper than just breakfast. And that was enough. On his walk back to the car, Daniel didn't think about pending mergers or late-night calls. He didn't think about what he'd given up. He thought about what he was building. For the first time in his life, it didn't feel like he was climbing toward something. It felt like he had finally arrived at something that mattered more than winning ever had. The invitation to pancakes came 2 days later, not from Emma, but from Lily. It arrived in the form of a text, short, almost cautious, like she wasn't sure how he would respond. Emma wants to know if you're free Sunday morning. She insists you help her flip pancakes. Daniel stared at the message for a moment longer than he needed to, letting the weight of it settle into him. It wasn't just a meal. It was a shift, a subtle but clear indication that Lily was starting to see him not as the man who had left, but the one who had stayed. Sunday morning was bright, the kind of soft, golden morning where the world felt quiet and forgiving. He brought a small bouquet of flowers, not roses, but something light and cheerful, daisies and peonies, picked up from a local street stand on the way. He also brought a new spatula, wrapped in tissue paper and ribbon, because Emma had told him during one of their sandbox chats that hers was wobbly. When Lily opened the door, she looked surprised by the gesture, but she took the flowers without comment, setting them in a mason jar on the kitchen counter while Emma squealed with delight over the spatula. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, and music played softly from an old speaker tucked behind the toaster. Emma stood on a small stool in front of the stove, already wearing an apron that nearly reached her ankles. "You're late," she announced dramatically, pointing at him with her finger dusted in flour. "I had to stir the batter all by myself." Daniel raised his hands in surrender and grinned. "I'll make it up to you with the perfect pancake flip. No burns. No splashes." Emma looked at him with narrowed eyes. "You better." They cooked together, the three of them navigating the tiny kitchen like they'd done it 100 times. Lily moved around them with practiced ease, offering directions without needing to raise her voice. Daniel burned the first pancake, which Emma declared a disaster, but he redeemed himself with the second, which flipped high into the air and landed clean in the pan. Emma clapped and called it magic. They sat down to eat at the small round table in the living room, passing syrup and strawberries, laughing over how much whipped cream Emma could stack before her pancake disappeared underneath it. It was simple, chaotic, and perfect in a way that made Daniel ache with something that felt both new and long overdue. After breakfast, Emma curled up on the couch with a stack of picture books and demanded a reading session. She nestled between Daniel and Lily, one of her small hands resting on his knee as she followed along with the words. Her trust had become physical, unthinking. She leaned on him as if he had always been there. Daniel felt the edges of his life shifting, the definition of home redrawing itself in real time. Once Emma went to her room to play, Lily started clearing the plates. Daniel joined her without needing to be asked. The kitchen was quiet now, the morning sun spilling across the floor. She's really happy, Lily said quietly, rinsing a plate. She hasn't smiled like this in a long time. Daniel dried the plate and set it aside, then met her eyes. Neither have I. Lily looked at him for a moment, and something softened in her expression. I'm still scared, she admitted. Not just for her. For me too. You're here now, and it's good. But it's also fragile. I've built everything around protecting her from being let down. I know, he said. And I'm not asking you to pretend I didn't fail you before. But I want to be here. For her. For you, if you'll let me. And not because I feel guilty. Because I want this. She studied him, then nodded once. We'll see. Just don't disappear. I won't. They finished the dishes in silence, but it was the kind of silence that no longer felt tense. It was the silence of two people sharing a space, a task, a moment. When Daniel left later that afternoon, Emma hugged him tightly and asked if he could come back next Sunday. Lily didn't answer for her. She just looked at him and said, "We'll keep a seat open." And in that simple gesture, Daniel felt the first glimpse of something he hadn't dared hope for. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't temporary. Maybe this was the beginning of a life he hadn't known how much he needed. Daniel's visits became a part of their routine, not every day, but often enough that Emma no longer asked if he was coming, she simply expected him. He showed up with sidewalk chalk or paper crowns, helped with homework that involved more glue than actual learning, and patiently listened to Emma explain the rules of games she made up on the spot and changed halfway through. Lily observed it all quietly, intervening only when needed, but Daniel could feel the difference in her. The walls she had kept up for so long weren't gone, but they were lower now, more like a fence than a fortress. She smiled more easily, laughed sometimes when she thought he wasn't paying attention, and no longer double-checked her watch the moment he walked through the door. On Thursday evening, Lily invited him to stay for dinner without Emma prompting her. It was a small thing, but to Daniel, it felt monumental. He brought groceries, nothing fancy, just pasta, garlic, and the makings for Emma's favorite cheesy bread. While they cooked, Lily let him chop vegetables, though she teased him for the way he held the knife, joking that he looked like he was negotiating with the onion instead of slicing it. Emma sat at the table drawing on napkins, announcing that they were now in a restaurant called Mommy's House, and Daniel was the official bread taster. He played along without hesitation. Later, while Emma watched a cartoon in the next room, Daniel and Lily sat on the balcony with mugs of tea. The evening air was cool, the sky bruised with fading streaks of pink and purple. For a while, neither of them said much. The silence was comfortable now, no longer filled with what-ifs or unspoken blame. It was Lily who finally broke it. "You've changed," she said softly, not looking at him. "You're not the man I said goodbye to 5 years ago." Daniel leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of that truth settle between them. "I hope not," he said. "I was selfish. I was so obsessed with proving myself that I didn't know how to be there for anyone else." "You weren't a bad person," she replied. "You just weren't ready." And I couldn't wait for you to figure it out while raising a baby alone. I know, he said. And I don't expect you to forget that. But I want you to know that I'm not here just for Emma. I mean, I am, of course, but I'm also here because I never stopped thinking about you. Lily turned to face him then, her green eyes calm and steady. Do you think it's possible to pick up where we left off? He shook his head. No. And I don't want to. I want to start where we are. You're not the same person either. You're stronger now. And so am I. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away either. I'm scared, she finally said. Of giving you this space again. Of what it would do to her if it didn't work. I am too, he admitted. But I'd rather face that fear than walk away again and wonder what we could have had. They sat there as the sky darkened completely, the soft hum of the city below them. Eventually, Emma padded onto the balcony in her pajamas, hair messy, holding her bear. Can he tuck me in tonight? She asked, her voice small but sure. Lily nodded without hesitation, and Daniel stood, swallowing the tightness in his chest. He followed Emma to her room, pulled the blankets up to her chin, and sat beside her while she told him all the things she still needed to do tomorrow. When her eyes began to close, she reached out and took his hand. Are you going to stay forever now? She mumbled, already halfway asleep. He didn't know how to answer that with the weight it deserved, so he said what he could. As long as you'll let me. Her fingers didn't let go. When he stepped back into the living room, Lily stood there waiting, arms folded not in defense but in thought. She walked up to him and, without saying a word, pressed a kiss to his cheek. Good night, Daniel, she whispered. And for the first time in years, he didn't walk away from the door wondering if he belonged. He knew he did. Sunday came with the kind of early spring light that made everything feel a little softer. The windows of Lily's apartment were cracked open to let in the breeze, and the smell of waffles drifted through the rooms along with the sound of Emma humming in the kitchen while she arranged her collection of syrup bottles like precious treasure. Daniel arrived before she had even asked, carrying a paper bag filled with strawberries and a small bunch of tulips he'd picked out for no real reason other than the fact that he knew Lily liked flowers that didn't beg for attention. When Lily opened the door, she didn't look surprised. She just stepped aside to let him in, as though he had always been expected. Breakfast unfolded like it had the week before, full of jokes and flour smudges and Emma insisting that her bear get his own plate. But something was different. Not louder, not more exciting, just steadier. They moved around each other easily, comfortably, like three people who had stopped pretending they weren't becoming something more than what they had been. When Emma spilled juice, Daniel caught the cup before it rolled off the table. When Lily needed the cinnamon, he passed it without her asking. There were no glances filled with hesitation, no pauses where explanations once lived. There was only now. Later, after the dishes were done and Emma was distracted with a puzzle on the floor, Daniel and Lily sat together on the couch, their knees just barely touching. Neither of them spoke for a long time, but it wasn't silence that needed to be filled. It was just quiet, the kind that made room for something better than words. Lily leaned her head against his shoulder and he didn't move, just took a slow breath and let it settle into the space between them. She spoke first, and her voice was soft, but sure. I think she knows, Lily said, watching Emma twist a puzzle piece into place. That this is different. That it's real now. Daniel nodded, his voice low. I know it too. They talked then, not about the past, but about what came next. About school field trips and dance recitals, about how Emma had started writing her name with a backwards E and insisted it was better that way. They talked about routines and nights he could take her to the park, about dinners that might happen more than once a week. And at some point, without making a decision or declaring anything official, they both knew that whatever had existed between them 5 years ago was gone, and what had taken its place was something far stronger. As the afternoon sun warmed the floor beneath their feet, Emma climbed up beside them on the couch, crawling between them with the confidence only children have when they know they are entirely loved. She held her bear in one hand and Daniel's shirt in the other, resting her head against his chest without asking. He looked at Lily, and she gave him a small, tired, honest smile. One of those smiles that says everything without needing to speak. That evening, Daniel didn't leave right away. He stayed through dinner, helped Emma brush her teeth, and sat beside her bed as she told him stories she'd made up in her head. When she finally fell asleep, her tiny hand still wrapped around two of his fingers, he sat there a little longer than he needed to. Just watching her breathe. Just memorizing the shape of this new life. When he returned to the living room, Lily was cleaning up toys half-heartedly, more out of habit than urgency. Daniel helped, picking up a crayon, a sock, and finally the paper with Emma's drawing from days ago, the 3 stick figures holding hands. He looked at it and then at Lily. "I don't want to go back to being someone who only visits," he said quietly. "I want to be here. Every day. Every night. If you'll let me." Lily didn't answer right away. She walked over, took the drawing from his hand, and set it gently on the table. Then she looked up at him, her eyes full of everything they had been through, hurt, strength, forgiveness, and something that had taken its time to return, hope. "I want that too," she said. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. And in that small, ordinary moment, surrounded by toys and laundry and a little girl sleeping down the hall, Daniel finally understood something he never had before. Love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about staying. Showing up. And never walking away again.